Hello and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm David J. Lynch, global economics correspondent here at the Post. Today I'm joined by John Porcari, President Biden's former port envoy and also a former Maryland State Department of Transportation head. We'll be talking about the economic and supply chain implications of the recent collapse of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you, David.
It's good to have you with us. I can't think of a better guest, given your background, to discuss the topic of the day. Let's start with some basics. With the port now cut off from its normal operations by the ruined bridge that's lying across the main channel leading to the ocean, that's a big hit to the regional economy, certainly to the port itself. How economically significant is the Port of Baltimore? What products are going to be affected or are already affected?
Well, first, David, we should remember that there were some victims here, and that this was a true tragedy for those families. The impact for the Port of Baltimore, for the region, and for the nation is actually pretty substantial. So, just to set the stage a little bit, the Port of Baltimore is more than 300 years old. It was established by the colonial legislature in 1706. It has grown with the nation, and today, as you point out, is the number one port in the nation for what's called roll-on, roll-off cargoes. These are automobiles, construction machinery, helicopters, everything that you can imagine that is big, bulky, and of high value. So that's one immediate impact, and we can talk a little bit about some of the specific aspects of that. It's also a container port that is moving more than 1.1 million TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units every year. So it's important for the local, regional, and national market in that sense as well. And in terms of economic impact, locally, regionally, and nationally, there's 15,000 direct employees for the Port of Baltimore complex, the public and private terminals. There's about 140,000 jobs overall. It is by far the largest source of good paying, family supporting blue collar jobs in the state of Maryland. The same is true in regions throughout the country, reaching through the railroads, for example, the CSX Railroad out to Ohio and Pennsylvania, Michigan, Illinois, and other states.
Now, this situation in Baltimore comes with global supply chains already being buffeted by drought in the Panama Canal, armed attacks on shipping going through the Red Sea, lingering effects of the war in Ukraine. How much slack is there globally in the system? And is there enough to adequately absorb Baltimore's work as it spills out into alternative venues?
Maybe the best way to think about global maritime trade is it's a system of systems. It's a private sector led and operated, operating all over the world, that essentially has very little redundancy and resiliency. We found that out the hard way during the pandemic, when all of us shifted our consumer buying patterns just enough to upset the global supply chain. And the kind of capacity needs for the personal spending that came during the pandemic were not easy to accommodate. And so, as you point out, both of the major canal transit points in the world, Suez and Panama, are both under stress right now for different reasons. But the impact overall has been substantial on the global supply system. With the loss in the short term of the Port of Baltimore, even more of that flexibility is gone. It's important to think a little bit about how the supply chain works. So, in the Far East right now, for example, there are ships that are loading that are 84 days or more away from coming to the Port of Baltimore. They might stop at multiple other stops. If it's a container ship, it's carrying thousands of containers. The stowage plan, the way the software that determines where each box goes on that ship, are based on their port calls. Those have to be modified and changed. The port calls themselves, the sequence that of that vessel string might actually have to be changed as part of it. So those are some of the immediate adjustments that need to be made. Longer term adjustments for the customers, for both imports and exports, it may take a little bit more time. So, in another example, John Deere farm machinery or construction equipment going out of the port of Baltimore to customers in Europe not only has to uh, be loaded on a roll-on, roll-off ship at an alternative port in the short term, it has to arrive at the right port in Europe at the right time.
Now, these global supply chains have really built up over the last several decades and prioritized efficiency and low cost over just about everything else. The last 4 years, as you know, has seen one headache after another. First, the pandemic, then the war, isolated problems in various ports and bottlenecks. What lessons did you take away from your experience working in the White House to try and sort out some of those problems in 2021 and 22? And how much of a rethinking of the global supply chain approach do you think we might be facing at this point?
There's been some important lessons learned from the pandemic and the supply chain issues that it caused, and a lot of important work has actually come out of that. So, for example, making sure that there's more capacity in the system. It's an interdependent worldwide system. The global economy that we have today is built on the foundation of maritime trade that's low cost, predictable, and efficient. And it's in real dollar terms, it's gotten more um, efficient every year. One of the things that we learned the hard way is that the uh, supply chain itself is a series of blind handoffs from one private sector user, like the global carriers, to railroads, to trucking companies, and others. And having better data and better visibility was one of the important lessons that we learned. At least as important as some of the brick and mortar investments is the data information exchange that has been set up as a result of the lessons that we learned, where you have private companies voluntarily sharing data to get a sense of that system of systems, how that supply chain actually works throughout the world, and leads to the ability to actually see around the corner a little bit and see some of the shortages developing before they're a crisis.
Now, before the port can resume normal operations, the ruins of the bridge and the dolly, the container ship that crashed into it, will have to be cut up and moved out of the way. And that's going to be a heck of a job. There's something like 764 tons of hazardous materials still on that vessel. Some of the wreckage of the concrete and the steel from the bridge is under 50 feet of often very murky water. How much of a project are the teams, the Navy teams, and the others, the Army Corps of Engineer, the private sector divers who are going to be involved in this? How much of an operation is this? How long do you expect it to take? How dangerous will it be?
It's an extraordinary challenge, and there have been previous disruptions to the national transportation system, and from, for example, the I-34W bridge collapse in Minneapolis and I-95 in Philadelphia more recently. Those, frankly, pale in comparison to this challenge. This is uh, uh, will require extraordinary collaboration. The good news is that from the very beginning and from the very top, from President Biden directly, uh, there's been a response that we collectively will do whatever it takes. We'll do it together, and we will roll up our sleeves and get it done. You're seeing that happen right now in the extraordinary federal-state cooperation uh, led at the state level by Governor Moore, who, like President Biden, understands that you lead from the front, not the back, and has been upfront in addressing this. These are agencies that work together to respond to national emergencies. Have never had a challenge quite like this, though, and the work that they are doing together is literally plowing new ground in terms of what it takes for the recovery phase of this operation. I'm very encouraged by the level of coordination, cooperation, and commitment of resources, whatever's needed at the state and federal level.
Now, as a first step, officials just in the last 24 or 48 hours have opened up a temporary channel just north of the disaster site itself. That's good news, of course, but the depth of the channel is limited to just 11 feet, as opposed to the 50-foot draft that these big container ships need. So this is a partial step. Help us understand what can get through there. I assume we're talking about barging in some cargo. What would you anticipate would be worth the effort to bring in that way? And I assume that's just going to be a tiny percentage of what the port normally does on a given workday.
That's right, David. Well, first and foremost, the temporary channel allows the workboats, the cranes, the different maritime vessels that are engaged in the recovery effort to move around more easily. It will also hopefully allow for some limited barge movement, where, for example, containers that aren't moving by truck or train right now from the land side of the Port of Baltimore will be able to be barged. But it's important to point out that this is at best, a limited restoration of some of the maritime commerce part. It's primarily going to have an immediate benefit for the first responders actually doing the recovery work on the site. The if you look at the stages of recovery after that, restoring the shipping channel itself at a 50-foot depth for the passage of at least one vessel. You don't have to have two vessels passing each other initially. Will be ultimately what's needed to recover the port portion of it. It's worth pointing out that getting the original 50-foot depth of the channel and the berths at the container terminal was a decade-long effort by a number of people at the federal and state level. This is obviously an emergency. It'll be handled and is operating under an emergency basis. But this is a massive undertaking that is going to take a while. And while people are throwing around timeframes for the removal of the debris, for example, I think it's important to state that the unknowns are going to drive that timing at this point, and we'll know more as we get along with it.
Yeah, I was up in Baltimore on Friday talking to freight and logistics specialists, and you're quite correct. There's no definitive timeline for this yet. I've heard estimates from a month up to 6 months before we'll have, full restoration of normal shipping there. What's your take on it?
It could certainly be that time frame. It could be longer. There is a will and a determination to do it as quickly as you can safely do it, and I think that the joint efforts are off to a great head start, given how well everyone is working together, given the commitment of resources, and we'll have to see how it goes at this point. But again, there are some real unknowns here. Just to give you a sense of what the channel is like, if you're a diver out there, if you're lucky, you can see a few feet in front of your face. It's very cold. You have strong currents. You have tidal changes, and you have no idea what debris might be a foot or two in front of you. So there are some real challenges, and this has to be done in a safe, methodical, but relentless way.
Yeah, it sounds like a heck of a job. Uh, so for the shippers who normally would be bringing cargo in and sending cargo out through that port, they obviously are making alternative arrangements to come in from Norfolk, perhaps New York, New Jersey, elsewhere. How much of that business that would have come to Baltimore and then migrates away somewhere else, perhaps temporarily, how much of that do you think shippers will get comfortable with their new operations, their alternative channels, so to speak, and stay there and never bring that business back to Baltimore?
Well, it's important to point out that the Port of Baltimore is one of the top ports in the country and the number one roll-on, roll-off port for a reason. It has some distinct geographic advantages. For example, it's a couple hundred miles closer to the Midwest markets than any other East Coast port. So those natural advantages, I think, in the long term, will serve it well. There are different kinds of cargoes that are more likely to stay in the long term. So if you look at the container traffic, for example, there's a lot of discretionary container cargo in most of the East Coast ports. It can shift from one to another. It can shift back. What's less likely to change in the longer term are some of the very high value cargoes, the export that I mentioned of construction machinery, agricultural machinery. The Port of Baltimore is the number 9 port in the nation by dollar value because of those high value uh, cargoes that are essential for the U.S. economy and export. I believe that with the roll-on, roll-off cargoes as a base, that the long-term restoration of the port will happen, that it will continue to grow in the future, and those natural advantages that it has, including, by the way, a workforce that's highly efficient and productive, will continue to advantage the port in bringing back that business.
The federal government has already approved $60 million as what Maryland Governor Wes Moore describes as a quote unquote down payment on the process of clearing the channel and rebuilding the bridge. Is this a time to, perhaps on a parallel track, reimagine the port's operations or design in additional infrastructure improvements? Or do you expect or would you advise that we simply sprint as quickly as we can to get back to the status quo ante and get that port up and running again? Which is the better approach?
The right approach, and I think the only approach that we should take, and I think that one that clearly the president and the governor have both supported, is to do the right thing and future-proof the port as much as possible with any improvements. And what I mean by that is, I talked about the decade-long investment in getting a 50-foot channel. The Key Bridge had an air height of 185 feet. If you look at the Bayonne Bridge in New Jersey, which was an existing bridge that was raised to accommodate the largest container ships, it's at 215 feet now. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey spent over $1 billion taking an existing bridge and raising it to meet existing container traffic and cruise ship needs. Uh, we should certainly do that with the Francis Scott Key Bridge replacement. We should make sure that it serves not just today's needs, but the futures. It's also important to rebuild it in a safer way than a bridge opened in 1977 and designed in the early 70s uh, was. So, for example, you didn't have breakdown shoulders for the traffic on the bridge. You didn't have hiker biker facilities connecting uh, major parts of the Baltimore metro area over that bridge. The kind of armoring and protection that you can have for the piers today is a lot different than what was in place at the time. You want to have that air draft. I mentioned the height sufficient for the future. This replacement bridge is one that most likely your children, your grandchildren, maybe your great grandchildren will be using. So it's really important, as much as everyone wants it open tomorrow, to do it right, to make sure that it serves, like all good transportation facilities, future economic development needs, not just today's.
And what will the port's operations look like during the reconstruction phase? Because it sounds like what you're talking about, what other officials have talked about, is a multi-year process to get that new bridge up and running, measured as a percentage of the pre-collapse throughput. Will the port be operating at 50% capacity, 75%? What would you expect?
It's obviously an educated guess, but once the channel is restored, the port will be back to virtually normal operations. The loss of the Key Bridge also means the loss of the hazmat route for trucks in the area. Um, that will have to be accommodated long term. But I think you'll see as the channel is restored, the port very quickly going back into operations. And if you're doing final assembly work in Moline, Illinois, that's every bit as important as it is to the people of the city of Baltimore who work directly at the port. It's as important to the national economy as it is to the local one. And I think that's why you see this unanimity of effort and understanding that this is not just an interconnected system, it's an interconnected economy, and we all depend on each other.
I want to go to one of our audience questions. This comes from John in Massachusetts. He asks, what will be the most efficient alternative routes for the flow of goods while the bridge is being reconstructed? And will the bridge be totally redesigned based on this accident?
Well, the state of the art is always advancing in bridge design, and it's certainly a lot more advanced than it was in the early 70s. One of the reasons that that facility is a bridge and not a tunnel, Baltimore already has two tunnels, including I-95 tunnel, is you can't bring hazardous material shipments in trucks through the tunnels. So there has to be some accommodation for that. That serves the entire east coast of the United States, not just Baltimore. That's a key link in the system. There are temporary alternative trucking routes, less than optimal, but certainly workable. And you'll see that continue for however long it takes to build a new bridge facility. It's not just a question of doing it quickly; it's a question of doing it right, as I mentioned. And I think that that is one place where the our federal partners, our state partners together are in lockstep on doing it right.
And anytime there's an accident of this sort, you can expect a regulatory and perhaps even a legislative response. The head of the NTSB, which is investigating the accident, commented the other day that the black box data recorders found on container ships, for instance, are much more rudimentary than the ones found on commercial airliners. That seems like an obvious place for officials to perhaps tighten up the regulations. What sort of additional response, if any, do you think would be warranted?
Well, the National Transportation Safety Board is an important safety asset in that it's an independent agency that does these investigations, whether it's a bridge disaster like this, aviation, pipelines, or other parts of the transportation system. And we do learn valuable lessons each time. I also expect that the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Maryland Department of Transportation will have parallel efforts to learn those lessons. The reality is the state of the art in safety and security tends to advance when you look carefully at incidents that have happened. You can bet that'll be the case here. If the uh, Key Bridge was designed in the last 10 years as opposed to the early 1970s, it would be a lot different than the structure that you saw and see in the water right now. So that safety and security will continue to advance. It will have some nationwide lessons for what will be dozens, if not hundreds, of other bridge structures around the country.
And how about the future of these ever larger container ships? On the one hand, they're truly a technological and engineering marvel. They allow us all to enjoy wider product choice, cheaper products coming to us from all over the world, but they really are massive vessels. And I wonder, in your mind, have we effectively reached the limit of the container ship size, or do you think it's possible and safe for them to continue growing?
Well, we have already reached some practical limits in the worldwide supply chain, with both the Suez and Panama canals being limited factors. There are ships out there that they can't use either one of those canals, and they're both essential for global commerce. In ports all around the United States, you find air draft issues where bridges aren't high enough for some of the vessels that are out there today. I do think that there are some practical limits. The growth in the size of these vessels has been astounding. If you think about, if you went back to the bridge designers of the 1970s and told them there would be 22,000 20-foot equivalent unit TEU vessels, they probably would have had you locked up. But it's clear that there is some practical limit on that. The investments on the land side at container ports, where a crane has to reach across 22 or 24 or 26 containers just to pick one off a ship, there are some practical and I think economic limitations to that.
And how about other ports reconsidering their bridge design and bridge safety? Are there other American ports that should be taking a look at putting protective structures around their bridges, or was Baltimore an isolated example?
Well, this is clearly potentially a nationwide issue. So there are what they call fracture critical bridges, bridges with single points of failure, which was the state of the art of design in the 1970s, all over the country, not just at ports, but in spanning rivers and lots of other places in the country. Uh, as an industry, people have worked to um, make sure there's no future fracture critical designs to make sure that the state of the art in terms of armoring channels and piers is happening. It is evolving, and just to give people a sense of the size of that vessel, which is not an extraordinarily large container vessel. It's basically the size and displacement of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. That is clearly something no one envisioned at the time the bridge was designed.
Remarkable. Well, in the minute or so we have left, I want to end on one more question from an audience member, appropriately enough from Maryland. Don asks, what strategies can be implemented to mitigate future economic impacts and enhance the resilience of the Port of Baltimore? And just about a minute left.
Don, it's a great question. I mentioned resiliency and redundancy. We need to make sure that the port is not constricted by any kind of catastrophe like this in the future. We need to make sure that the transportation investments and design are ones that allow for that kind of resiliency, and we need to think far into the future, as I mentioned before, to make sure that what we do build will serve us well for 50 or 75 or even 100 years.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So, John, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you again for joining us for a fascinating conversation. This topic's going to be with us, obviously, for some time to come. And thanks to all of you for joining us as well. And if you enjoy the sort of conversations that we bring you here on Washington Post Live, I'd encourage you, of course, to get a subscription to the Washington Post. To do that, to get a free trial first, of course, you can visit WashingtonPost.com/live. And I'm going to repeat that once again because it's a bit of a mouthful. WashingtonPost.com/live for your free trial of the Washington Post. I'm David J. Lynch. Thanks for joining us.